All right. Well, thank you, Peter. And we're here today to have a great panel discussion on what it actually means to implement the CSRD in practice. And we're going to do that by looking at a real life example of a company, AkzoNobel, a Dutch company in painting and coating, and with a practitioner who is providing assurance to AkzoNobel for PwC. So really want to focus on the challenges of the CSRD and how they are being tackled in practice. I'm very pleased to be joined today by Wijnand Bruinsma, Director of Sustainability at AkzoNobel, Marcus Looijenga, Partner ESG for PwC, and Jan Bouwens, who is a researcher of management accounting and auditing at the University of Amsterdam, and also research fellow of Cambridge University at the Judge Business School. Gentlemen, welcome and thank you for joining. We are in 2024, and 2024 is the year in which the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, applies for the first time for large listed European companies. So it's been the focus of all of us, I think, for the last year or so in order to make that transition. And before we start, maybe Marcus, I could ask you, the CSRD and the ESRS moves us from a voluntary sustainability reporting regime to a mandatory regime that also requires limited assurance. Maybe just briefly talk about what the CSRD and also the standards that underlie them, the ESRSs, are going to require from companies.
Yes, thank you, Mark, and hello, everyone. So if you look at the CSRD, so maybe briefly what it's all about. It's a directive adopted by the European Commission, which is really aimed at having transparent sustainability reporting, having that relevant for stakeholders, but also comparable to other companies in the industry that the company is in. And now that CSD needs to be embedded in the local law of the member states, and it has a significant extension of the scope of sustainability reporting opposed to what we're used to now. So it will definitely expand the content of the sustainability reporting. And in order to do so, the EU has created their own reporting standards, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, or ESRS, if you will. And they mandated that the sustainability reporting will be part of the management report, which has obviously sort of a different legal status as well. Important, if you look at the CSD, is the concept of double materiality, where we are used that companies are reporting on the impact that they have on the outside world in terms of sustainability matters. Now, companies are also required to report on risk and opportunities from ESG matters that are affecting them outside it. There's some other elements to it, for example, electronic formatting, tagging. There's a responsibility for management and governance, really a role for the audit committee to oversee the process of sustainability reporting. And with this directive, there's clear responsibility for preparation, oversight, enforcement as well from enforcement bodies. And last but not least, there is a mandatory assurance part to the sustainability reports. So companies will ask their auditor to provide limited assurance on the sustainability reporting. And in a later state, that might lead to a reasonable assurance, which is sort of the same level of what we know for financial audits. And as you said, Mark, this will be a very interesting year, 2024. Public large interest entities need to report on CSD for the first time. A year later, large companies in the EU also need to report on that. And even later on, we'll see that listed SMEs, but also third country undertakings will be reporting on the CSD. So quite a big piece of legislation. If you look to the ESRSs that I talked about, the standards, they're now developed and published. There are two cross-cutting standards, which know more general disclosures. 11 topical standards, amongst others, environment, report of carbon emissions, for example. And later on, we will expect sector standards or standards for small, medium enterprises, which are developed now. And the way I look at them, it's conceptually it's a good reporting standard. Practically, this will be a real challenge. I think we'll talk about that a bit further this session. There are a lot of disclosure requirements with hundreds of qualitative and quantitative data points, and navigating really across these different functional areas such as HR, legal, sustainability, reporting will be quite a challenge for companies. And really the devil is in the details there. So there will be a lot of upskilling for different professionals to get this on board, and it will be still a lot of work for big companies, I believe, to get this embedded this year.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And let me then move to Wijnand, right? Because I think you already set it up. It's a challenge for Wijnand. For AkzoNobel, this is not new because we know that you have been reporting, and so that sustainability has been a topic for your company for many years. So maybe a few words on yourself and your background, and then also maybe about AkzoNobel's sustainability agenda before we go into more detail as to what the CSRD means for you.
Thanks a lot, Mark. And Marcus, thanks a lot for already introducing the topic of CSRD. So my name is Wijnand Bruinsma. I'm Director of Sustainability at AkzoNobel, responsible for setting the strategy, running the different programs to execute on them, and also overseeing the reporting of the sustainability reporting. AkzoNobel, so we are one of those larger companies who are in scope in over 2024. We're a company with 35,000 people across the globe. About 11 billion of revenue. And what we produce is paints and coatings, and we do that in about 150 countries. Now, what is paints and coatings? Well, probably have the laptop or the computer that you're using has coating on it. The chair that you're sitting on is been coated. The table is coated. If you start traveling, well, trains, planes, cars are all coated. And the bridge that you go drive over, and the building that you're in, is all coated. And what we do with that is longevity. So we make sure that things last longer. That's what paints and coatings is about. And that's a bit of what we do. If you think about sustainability, so we are a producing company. If you think about sustainability, we focus on three main topics. So one is about making more durable solutions in a more sustainable way. That's about our own operations, so what we do. The second is about how we help our customers to become more sustainable, because we can do quite a lot with that thin layer of paints and coatings. And the last element is about how we empower our people and the communities around us. And what you see in there is a bit of the ESG, so the environmental, the social, and governance topics coming back. And if you kind of drill down, it's our own operations. We really focus on carbon reduction and on waste reduction. How we avoid waste from becoming waste, because it was a precious raw material just the moment before it turned into waste. We look at carbon emissions because we are a production company, and we've set a very ambitious target of 50% carbon reduction by 2030 on a 2018 baseline. So that's following the 1.5 degree pathway for everybody who's a bit into climate sciences. And we're currently already at 38%. So we're making good progress towards our own operations ambition. And we set exactly the same target to help our customers to become more sustainable, which is our value chain carbon footprint reduction. Again, 50% by 2030. Currently, we're at 9%, so a little bit of a longer way to go. And it's one of the key challenges, because it's about how do we influence, how do we get all of our stakeholders and our peers to join along on that journey of decarbonization. A very important one. And then we focus on our community and our people, but I won't go into too much detail. I think the focus should be on probably in this for this session also on the environmental side. Now, just talking a little bit about reporting, and I'll stop or I'll pause, is about ESG reporting is not something new. Like sustainability is integrated in our strategy, in our core values, and even in our incentive structure. Well, the same is true for ESG reporting. We do that for over a decade. Already in 2008, and we had limited assurance on our sustainability statements. Now things have evolved and evolved quite rapidly, and that's I think is the beauty, but also the challenge with CSRD coming our way.
Yeah, let's drill a bit further into that, Wijnand, right? Because I think one of the things that I often hear is that, okay, well, we get all these reporting requirements, but how do you engage the business, and how do you actually let it land in the business? Because reporting is only a means to an end, I would think, right? Because in the end, what we want is, yeah, well, more transparency, more comparability, and you engaging in a conversation with your stakeholders on the ambitions that you have set, right? So what do you see as kind of the, you know, the major challenges to actually incorporate this in the business, and particularly also, I think you mentioned already the scope 3, which clearly is something that touches all of your business, I guess, because it touches your value chain.
Yeah, exactly. No, Mark, you're totally right. So our core focus should be on making the impact, not on reporting about the impact. But I want to set things or make things clear here is that I hear many of my peers talk about the reporting burden that is created by CSRD, how complicated it is, how short of a timeline we have to implement all of that, and all of that is true. But there's a lot more to it. CSRD is going to have a strategic implication. It's going to drive companies forward. And that's the beauty of what we do here. Being able to have a standard across all of the different companies, reporting in the same way, is going to be so beneficial. If I now make a peer analysis, probably the disclaimer about all of the assumption that we needed to make, compare our numbers with some of our peers, is longer than the actual facts that we're talking about, because everybody has their own unit of measurement, their periods, their scoping. All that is just different. So comparability is a key thing, which is so important. Also, think about the strategic conversation we are able to have with our customers and our suppliers in all of this, is the fact that all of a sudden we start talking about the material topics of a company. And Marcus alluded already on the double materiality. This is such a strong conversation that we all of a sudden can have, which transitions a kind of a traditional buyer-seller relation into much more of a strategic conversation on our material topic is carbon reduction, yours as well. How are we able to help each other out? And into light of scope 3, as for everybody who may not be aware of this, so scope 1 and 2 is about your own operations. It's what either leaves your site over at the chimney, which is your scope 1, and our scope 2 is the electricity consumption. But scope 3 is everything that happens before you in the chain and after you. So your suppliers and your suppliers' suppliers, those are customers using our product. For us, only 1% is that 130 production sites across the globe that are producing the best paint and coating solutions in the world. But 99% is outside of that. And that's why it's so important to have those strategic conversations with the suppliers and the customers. And CSRD is one vehicle actually to have that strategic conversation.
Okay, Jan, I'm also looking at you. I mean, are there any questions at this stage or any observations that you want to make?
Yeah, so actually, I do have. So there has been this concern expressed that we in the EU are moving much faster and have heavier requirements that we impose on firms than in the rest of the world. And it has been argued that maybe actually that might be to our benefit, in that we are better at making the transition work. But actually, it can also put us backward, in terms of competitiveness. And it would be actually interesting to have your view on that, Wijnand, if that's possible.
Yeah, sure. And, well, indeed. So if you look at the current scope, so now the larger multinationals in headquartered in Europe are in scope, and after a couple of years, also the companies who are headquartered outside but have significant business in Europe will be in scope. And I do admit there's a big challenge here, because we are requested to report on all of these things. We are requested to invest the resources that we are doing into making sure that our reporting is compliant. Where if you look at our industry, our largest competitors are US-based companies. They will only be in scope after a couple of years. Now, it's the way you look at it. Is the glass half full or half empty? Yes, it will require more of our efforts to work on this. But it also gives us a very, very big advantage, because we are further ahead with how to report on it. And that's just the reporting. But as I just explained this, there's a strategic conversation we are able to have with those larger companies. Now, we have been very vocal over the years that we wanted to have more standardization in reporting. We come from a period where we developed our own standards, not because we wanted to, but there was nothing. Then we had a couple of voluntary reporting frameworks where every new one kind of claimed to be the next one which will take over everything, but it didn't happen. Now, CSRD is a good attempt to get there, but it missed the point that it's currently just Europe-based companies and will expand into the future. And therefore, the interoperability, so how are this going to be linked to other reporting frameworks, is going to be essential. Because I don't want to lead a team of ESG reporting. I want to lead an ESG strategic team, which is also reporting about the progress that we're making.
Well, that's interesting, Wijnand, right? Because we didn't mention this because today we focus on the CSRD, but clearly there's also a global standard being developed by the International Sustainability Standards Board, the ISSB, and there are about 20 countries, I think, at the moment already looking at how they can either adopt or use these standards in a national context. I would agree with you fully that it is important that Europe and these international standards are interoperable and even preferably being set at the same time rather than one always trying to steal the thunder of the other and then have to reconcile afterwards, right? So I think that there's a big challenge there still, but yeah, hopefully they will continue to work together. And I think Mark has already alluded to the fact that the next thing in the CSRD and EFRAG agenda is sector standards. This is also on the agenda of the ISSB and sector standards. One of my big pleas, in my role as Accountancy Europe president, is do these standards together and from the start, so that we don't have two sets of standards but one. But let's go back to maybe the question of Jan for a moment, right? And Marcus, I also would like to have your perspective. I know that you're actually the auditor of ESG assurance at a number of large Dutch companies. What's your sense of that? Is it going to help or hinder that we are actually being required in Europe to go first on scope 3?
Yeah, so I think it's a bit of the same reflection that Wijnand has. It has some pros and has some cons. Coming where I'm coming from with my intrinsic motivation for ESG, I'm obviously happy with the steps that we're taking. But I also understand the concerns that some of these companies have, and they do have these concerns. In general, what you will see in the Netherlands is that companies tend to be quite positive towards sustainability reporting. There are quite some companies that have been front runner for several years already. So they're happy to start with this. The companies that are really struggling with this are really the companies sort of below that front runner group that have to step up and do this, and especially if you operate in an international context with peers that are not in Europe. But in general, if you look at the EU Commission and the way they want to push the economy forward using the Green Deal, then I think giving this type of information is really necessary to direct all the capital flows, the finances towards more sustainable companies and to be really distinctive in the global world if you want to lead in sustainability. So I think that information that companies now have to put out there is really important. At the same time, I fully agree with you, Mark. Please, let's have global standards that we can use for each company. It will help companies, it will help us as auditor, but it will definitely help stakeholders also comparing between companies globally. So yeah, in my personal view, I do believe this is good. It's a good step forward. I really understand the concerns, and yeah, let's keep pushing on having these global standards in place.
Yeah, very good. So I go back to Wijnand and Jan, because I think it answered your question, right?
Yes,
so let's go to Wijnand then, and let's try to make it a bit more concrete, right? So if you think about scope 3, so you have to start really engaging deeply with your suppliers a supply chain. You have to see, how you're dealing with your customers on what they do with your product. Maybe give us a bit of a flavor of kind of how you're tackling, your Scope 3 ambitions, right? So what do you see as the challenges, and what is also, way to achieving your goals?
Yeah, so if you look at Scope 3, so our value chain carbon emissions, that's also where we've set our 50% carbon reduction by 2030 target. That is a very, very significant target that we've put out there, whereas about 50% is in our supply chain, so the suppliers and suppliers of suppliers, and about 50% is our customers using our product and disposing our product. So that's about the split between them. That's also where you see that we need to have approaches towards our suppliers, and we need to have the approaches towards our customers. But more importantly, how are we able to combine them at a certain moment? Now, if you look at how we approach this, so we've identified 4 key levers to decarbonize our value chain. That is about what we call process efficiency. All of the carbon emissions of our suppliers is just energy use. It's a lot of energy that is needed to produce the raw materials and the raw materials of our raw materials, etc., etc. So decarbonization is about making those processes more efficient and decarbonize them by changing to different ways of producing it or looking at different sources of energy. Can we go from fossil fuels to renewable fuels? Can we move from normal fossil electricity to renewable electricity? All of these steps do matter. So that's one. Second is about process efficiency. And that large part of our supplier or our customer carbon footprint is about the application and curing of paints and coatings. Now, paints and coatings, you might think about your own coating, which you decorate your wall, but a lot are more industrial coatings. And they go into an oven, if you like. And that's gas heated. Can we move them to different ways of curing, using electron beam, infrared, all kinds of different technologies? Process efficiency. Then we have about solvent emissions, which is specific for our industries. Solvents have a global warming potential, so we also include that. And the last is about the end of life, so the circular solutions, which can have an impact there. But everything of this is just the levers, but it's about collaborating. It's about collaborating with your suppliers and customers. And a lot of that is driven by having reliable data to start steering. And getting the right data in is going to be crucial. And actually, CSRD is triggering more and more companies to start measuring, reporting on their Scope 3 emissions, because for many companies, it is a material topic. And the better we get to that, the better information we have, the better we're able to steer towards lower carbon solutions, finding new clever solutions together with our partners. And that's actually what a lot of this is about. Because our Scope 3, our value chain emissions, in many cases, is the Scope 1 and 2, their own operations of others in the value chain. So if you can incentivize and make sure that they make those changes, actually then it's kind of a tailwind for your Scope 3. But let me be clear, we're currently at 9%. It is still a long way to go. It is an extremely challenging ambition. But because the actions we're taking right now, you will see more impact in the second half of the decade.
That is actually a positive message that you're sending. I'm just thinking about some other major global players that have just actually come out and said, well, we're going to maybe adjust our ambition a bit. And I'm thinking about it's public knowledge, right? Unilever that made a public statement, although it was not on Scope 3, but it links to climate. I think on their plastic production and consumption, they said, we were initially too ambitious and we're going to lower the targets. But do you expect that something may happen as well, kind of with the Scope 3 discussions? Or is that something that is on the book, or is it a unique situation at Unilever?
No, it's not. In our conversations with the board, we're not discussing any of this. We're developing and executing on the plans that we have started. Now, but in Unilever and some other companies as well, set ambitions in a time where data wasn't available. It's the metaphor that I sometimes use here is we're trying to build an airplane in flight mode. So we started something because we knew we needed to get started. That was Unilever, that's some other companies and us as well. We started that. while we were still kind of building the aircraft. But we know where we needed to go. We had a sufficient information, sufficient engine power to get there. So do things change over time? Yes, I don't have a crystal ball, like none of us have. But currently, it's not a discussion that we're having. We're focused on making that decarbonization work. We've identified the levers to get there. It's about speed of execution. And here's the key difference between our own operations and the value chain is our own operations, we're behind the steering wheel. We decide and we can make the capital expenditures that are needed, the OPEX that is required there. We can make those decisions. With Scope 3, it's more complicated. It's about influencing others. And yes, we are a large company, but we also work with even larger companies. So it's not as easy as just telling somebody, well, you need to decarbonize as well, and everything is fine. So that's a much more complicated one. But, well, short answer to it is no, that's not a discussion we're currently having.
Very good. Jan, you have any questions on this?
Yeah, but I mean, what I find interesting is this idea of really, reduction of energy use and the carbon footprint with that. Some recent research actually shows that managing the emissions versus really investing in getting rid of emissions, that the latter is actually much more successful than the first is. And actually that's what Wijnand was actually referred to. So that is something that is very interesting. And I would like to know, given these four levers that you introduced, right? What is your experience in that? Because the research says, well, the best thing to do is actually to get rid of any emission in carbon, in carbon emissions, rather than managing it. So what is your and Scope 3 is all about managing.
It is.
That's true, and but it is a complicated one, and I think setting an ambition of 50% in line with the 1.5 degree pathway is the goal that we as society should all strive for. But that's also a very challenging one. We've seen that more on a global scale, that it has proven to be extremely difficult to get there, despite many good intentions, many actions. I think with ambitions like this, we can't be picky on what to do, because we need to go all out in all different elements of it. Yeah. Some are more efficient than the others. But what I try to also tell the people in my organization, but also our partners, is, we don't have the luxury to just kind of select one or two and just do something. Let's go as far as we can go, try to find the most clever way of doing it, but we need to go all out in getting there.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm going back to Marcus then. Marcus, maybe now also Wijnand has set out kind of the process that they're following, and the four categories where they think they have levers to manage this. Now let's go to you as assurance provider, right? And maybe first look at, you're already doing this for a number of years, right? So you're already providing assurance, and you're giving limited assurance opinion. I think it's a limited assurance opinion for AkzoNobel, SPwC, over a number of KPIs. So what is going to be different, in 2024 when AkzoNobel is reporting under the CSRD, and how does that impact your approach as an assurance provider?
Yeah, so let me start where AkzoNobel is coming from, elaborating on what Wijnand said, the long history in sustainability, and I know AkzoNobel is a company that first and foremost is focused really on actually getting more sustainable. And I think that prevails above reporting. However, also on the reporting side, AkzoNobel has done major steps, and in my view, has been a front runner. Also spending time with the sector, helping the sector to get towards more relevant indicators, for example, with the World Business Council for Sustainability, writing the guidance to support the chemical companies to assess the social societal impact of the product. And then when it comes to reporting, I think AkzoNobel has sort of found its own way of reporting to reflect best those sustainability initiatives that they have done. And then when the voluntary frameworks came out, like GRI, etc., AkzoNobel has took those elements from those frameworks that help them the best to enhance their reporting. So I know AkzoNobel is always looking, okay, what's the best way to reflect the initiatives that we do, the sustainable impact that we have, using bits and pieces from all these reporting standards that are out there, and building that framework out in their annual reports. And in the past years, our assurance has focused on the results that they have. So really the numbers, the indicators that are in these annual report. I think we're currently at around 50 indicators that we assured, mainly focused on the environmental impact of AkzoNobel. If you then look at the CSRD, AkzoNobel is being pushed into a format which everyone has to comply with. Which consists of many metrics that are already under our assurance, but also many new elements. So it starts with our review of this double materiality assessment that I talked about earlier, but that has been done in a sufficient way in line with the ESRSs. But also reviewing any additional metrics, especially around social, there will be more. And also taking into account the review of all those qualitative disclosures. I think what's really strong around the ESRSs is that the metrics have to be placed in context, and that the auditor also needs to look at that context and assess that context in the limited discharge review. So it will significantly expand sort of our scope as well, looking at the sustainability statements of AkzoNobel. Now, we've always had the conversations around the qualitative information in the sustainability statements. And whether that provides sufficient context to the metrics that we assure. But now, well, it is a different ballpark if you actually assure that information as well. And then I think lastly, we also need to take the EU taxonomy disclosures into account that companies need to perform. So, yeah, it's increasing the efforts that we need to do on assurance, but it will also increase the information being assured for stakeholders.
Yeah. So what I hear you say, and I think I fully agree with that, right? Because it now, where you were focused more on KPIs and assuring KPIs, it's really, CSRD is moving towards assurance over the whole of the report. And as you say, I think I've heard something like 75% maybe qualitative and only 25% quantitative in terms of what's going to be reported, but you have to have a view on all of that, Marcus. So another topic that then always comes up is connectivity, right? And I think Wijnand already said, right? So if you think about what you need to do, if you manage your scope 3 downwards, you also need to look at how that links to your capex and what it actually requires in order to make the investments, in order to make these plans achievable. So the question to you, Marcus, so how do you work together with the financial statement auditor, and how do you do that actually in the setup? Is it more integrated than it was before, or don't you see any change? Be interested on your reflections on that.
Yeah, so I started, I think, as a sustainability auditor back in 2016. If you look back at those years, the financial auditor and sort of the sustainability auditor were quite separated in separate columns. You would also see that internally at companies, you had the sustainability department, the financial department. The question was whether they were talking to each other, maybe during drinks, but maybe not during office hours. And that has totally changed, I must say. I think it started already a couple of years ago, also a bit fueled by the TCFD, so the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. At one point in time, there was this conceptual thinking around, hey, if we report on sustainability matters, let's say climate, and if we have ambitions on climate change, but if we also see that climate is affecting us as a company due to fiscal effects like floods or transitional effects like carbon emission taxation, then there must be an effect somewhere in the financial statements. And I think that was the point in time where you would see that sustainability auditors and financial auditors are working far more closely together. And well, I think being integrated is maybe a next level, and we're moving towards that. It would be a bit too soon to say that we're fully integrated. But yes, we need to work far more together. So all those financial effects of climate change, either on you as a company or the CAPEX and OPEX conditions that you need to make, as Wijnand talked about, all those financial effects, you need to, as an auditor, look at that and have conversation around it. Okay, well, if someone from the financial audit side is auditing the CAPEX, there's a clear link, and we need to assess whether that's appropriately disclosed, accounted for, whether it matches with the EU taxonomy disclosures. So that's a lot of meetings and discussions, and effectively what you will see now is, especially with the CSRD expanding the scope already, you will see financial auditors being part of the sustainability audit team and vice versa, and you will see that integration grow. So there's a big step there.
Yeah, maybe one more question from really the kind of the audit and audit technique perspective, and then I'll come back to Wijnand in a second. But so if you think about a financial statement audit, in the technique of what that we apply, you always start with a proper risk assessment, right? Because you need to know where you need to focus your attention and where there's a significant risk of material misstatement, and these are the areas where you focus on, right? So can you maybe expand a bit then, in the context of what we were just saying, right? So scope 3 is a challenge. There may be others on circularity. So DMA obviously brings up quite a number of topics. I don't know, Wijnand, how many material topics have you identified at AkzoNobel? By top of you?
I think
8 or 9. Right? Yeah. So there's a lot to look at, Marcus. So how are you going about your risk assessment, and particularly in an ESG assurance engagement? Is that similar to what is happening on the financial statements audit, or are there differences?
In essence, conceptually, it's quite similar, but if you look at the content, it's obviously very different, and it starts really. So risk assessment for me starts really with having a very good understanding, and that's so important in sustainability reporting and assurance. So really understanding what you are looking at. So we look at the emissions, where the majority coming from. What Wijnand already explained. Okay, is the majority sitting in scope 1, 2, or 3? If they mainly relate to scope 3, is then the main influence is the upstream, is the downstream. What target has the company set? Why does the company set these targets? How are the emissions calculated? How are emissions reported? Where's the data coming from? Is it coming from suppliers? Is it for general emission factors for the industry? All those elements you really need to understand as an auditor to be able to do your risk assessment and to identify, okay, where could it go wrong in this process, and where could the information be not accurate, complete, or transparent to the stakeholders. And even more difficult, to what extent are these plans aligned with the Paris Accord? Are they approved by external parties like the SBTi, etc.? And only then, after that thorough understanding, your risk assessment will start as an auditor, and then you follow the same principles for the financial audit. So you will start with, okay, what are tendencies in the reporting, and this might be influenced by stakeholder needs or board remunerations, loan agreements, etc. But also don't underestimate the power of the NGOs. Also looking at corporations and scrutinizing them. And I think the obvious sort of primary assertion is the accuracy of the carbon emissions reductions, then and the accuracy of the reduction and the completeness of the emissions in absolute sensitivity report.
Yeah.
But yeah, if targets are easily reached and halfway through the year you're there, well, then there might be a risk of underreporting to ensure future reductions there. And then you have to plot those tendencies on these areas where you think it could go wrong. So are you updating your emission factors properly? How are your life cycle analysis updated? What do you account for in scope 3? All the material components in there. And as auditors, we're now developing a library, if you will, of risks to help navigate that risk assessment. but in essence, that's how we sort of view our risk assessment, through understanding and then through the tendencies and then understanding the risk that are in these processes of the company.
Yeah. There's one question, Marcus, is kind of in that focus, right? Is your focus ultimately on the metrics, or is it on the processes, or is it both?
Well, our focus will be on the information that is reported in the annual report, and which is in essence more outcome related. Under the CSRD, we'll focus for the double materiality more on the process, and for the other information, we'll focus more on the outcomes. But again, if you want to focus on the outcomes, so if I want to assess whether this carbon emission number for scope 3 is correct, I need to know the processes that are underlying that. We're not assuring the processes as such, and we're assuring more the information that's written down, which might include some reflections of the processes. But in essence, you need to understand this process really well to get to those outcomes.
Yeah, thank you. So Wijnand, back to you then. How do you see the cooperation with the auditors, and do you perceive it as valuable? That you are actually getting assurance, and just your reflections on how that cooperation works, and where.
Two things in there is one is about the and the value of the assurance. For me, that is critical, because we're building a strategy based on numbers, on data, and what we see there. So making sure that the numbers that we're having are being scrutinized, not only internally, but also somebody externally reviewing what we are doing and then where we should improve, is essential. Now, transitioning to CSRD, it's even more important that collaboration is there with the auditor. Of course, they're there to review what we're doing, but it's also a journey, and nobody has done this before. Nobody has reported according to CSRD before. We're all in that test phase. Coming back to the airplane again, which we're building in flight mode, this is almost what we have been doing with CSRD as well. The standards have been changing. It's the adaptation now of the local governments, which is still taking place. While we have to start reporting, because we need to report over this year, 2024. So that collaboration is key. And one of the things I would like to highlight there is if you really strictly follow CSRD and what you need to report on, we've tried that with our latest annual report as a first draft to write it in a way that actually follows exactly the structure of CSRD. And what we got to was a document, which, if you really have the patience to go through it, you will get to the message that the reader wants to get. But we should not forget that we don't write annual reports. We don't report for the sake of just reporting. We want to inform our stakeholders about how we are progressing, what are the challenges that we're facing. So what we've done, and that's where the collaboration with our auditor, so with Marcus, maybe he can allude there as well, is okay, so how do we make sure that we follow CSRD, but also make it a readable document? Because there's no point in just following it, but then have something that nobody understands. I'm not going to be the most loved person probably here, but with financial statements, we see something like that, right? So there are so many notes in there, which is so hard for people to understand that hardly anybody gets there. Only the true analyst will get there. Whereas actually what we try to do is to convey a message to the stakeholders about the key achievements that we have, but also the challenges that we're faced with and what is it that we need to work on. And we should always keep that in mind. And that has been a very fruitful discussion, a lot of challenging over the last year, but I'm really happy with where we've been able to get it already for our 2023.
Yeah, that I think you're making a very important point, Brandon, because that is the heart of the matter, right? In the end, you want to achieve something, where it's not the reporting is not an end in itself. Marcus, any reflection for you on that? Any reaction?
Yeah, and I think those relationships between a company and the auditor are really important. On the one hand, to have this critical sparring partner that's scrutinizing your data, but also to think along together. Okay, how will this reflect on the stakeholder? Will the message actually arrive at the stakeholder? And I mean, it's easy to say, okay, this number of maybe 10 or 15 is correct and complete. But as a stakeholder, you want to have that in a context of what you're doing in sustainability, in the context of what are your plans, what are your actions, what are your targets. Then only that number really makes sense. And what you will see now with the CSRD, elaborating on the point that Wijnand made, is that as an auditor, we'll not only discuss together the results and how they're presented in the report, but we, as an auditor, will also look at the plans. Well, you don't want to sort of take the place that management has and says the plan is not ambitious enough, or you should change your plan. But we also need to a certain extent scrutinize those plans and the disclosure around those plans. So are they reduced? Are they to a certain extent feasible or not? And what's the connection to the financial statement that we talked about earlier?
Yep.
So those elements come into play as well, and I think that's where the discussion between the company and the auditor will move from, well, the actual results to also the more qualitative statements that give the context to those numbers.
Yeah, I mean, that raises for me in my mind also a point about governance that we haven't touched on. So let maybe do that then. So maybe after Wijnand first, right? So Wijnand, I think you've made it clear that for your company, this is at the core actually of your business, right? And so I assume that the board actually drives a lot of this, and also be interested, right? In the Netherlands, we have a 2-tier board with a management board and then supervisory board. So how is the engagement at these levels, and what are their respective roles? How have you actually set up your governance to drive this? I'd be interested, because then I come to Marcus on how you then interact with these layers of governance as an auditor. But I think it is an interesting aspect as to who is driving this.
Yeah, indeed, and I think that's spot on. So where is actually the responsibility, and how are we driving those programs forward? Indeed, that is a board. So our executive committee, our management board, is in the driver's seat when it comes to sustainability. That's why I report directly to the executive committee when it comes to sustainability. Sustainability is not something on its own. It's integrated in how we operate our 130 production sites across the globe, which is our integrated supply chain organization. It's about how our business units are positioning our products and developing the products for the future. It's about how our sourcing organization is functioning and everything around it. So that is indeed, it is there, but that's also the development that we have been making over the years. And from that long history that we have in sustainability, we, like many other companies, started with kind of the traditional corporate social responsibility activities. We then moved to focusing on our own operations, and now we're really focusing as of early 2019, 2020. We transitioned really to focusing on the whole value chain, because that's where the most impact is. So that is how we operate, reporting directly to the executive committee. But the other important tiers indeed is our supervisory board, indeed in the Dutch system, making sure that they are well informed about sustainability and on how we're progressing towards certain goals that we've set, and steering in that direction. So every supervisory board meeting, which is about 6 times a year, I have the pleasure to also inform them and report back to our supervisory board on the topic. But then, as supervisory board, a subcommittee of that is our audit committee, and that's a very important one when we're talking about the reporting. What we try to do, if you look at the future state, is more and more financial and ESG reporting are going to merge. So our audit committee is going to be the one who should be overseeing our reporting activities. Now, we need to be mindful of a couple of things here. Is just currently ESG reporting is not ready to be integrated with financial reporting. If you look at the scope of it, we're not just talking about volumes and euros. We're talking about an awful lot of different metrics and different units of measures that we're talking about. We're talking about something which has a almost inherent ambiguity. So there's a lot of uncertainties in the numbers, which is difficult to treat. So we need to develop that to a level with control frameworks in place, with systems being upgraded, to bring that in line with financial reporting, to really bring it under that part. Until that moment, we need to make sure that we take the best of both worlds. So get the rigor in from the financial reporting, but also get the strategic view in from a sustainability point of view, to make sure that sustainability reporting is approached in the right manner.
Good. Thanks, Wijnand. And going back to Marcus then, right? Because I think as Wijnand is describing, kind of bringing this up to the level of financial statements, we also then talk in auditor's term again about limited assurance and reasonable assurance, right? And we know that in the CSRD, the Commission is tasked by looking and maybe introducing a requirement to have reasonable assurance at some point in time. They have to write the standard by 2028, but whenever that requirement comes in is still open for discussion, I guess, right? Because it means that companies will have to step up, right? So how do you look at that, Marcus? And what do you think that companies would need to do in order to achieve reasonable assurance? And then Wijnand already adds up. I will ask you what your ambition level is in that regard. But but Marcus, maybe as an accountant first, maybe set out a bit on what you see is needed, to get from one to the other, and maybe briefly, explain what it is actually that we do under both these levels of assurance.
Yeah, maybe start with that indeed. So limited assurance, for me, it's around plausibility of the information. At the end of the day, in our assurance opinion, we will say nothing has come to our attention that, the sustainability information would be not in accordance with the ESRS or would be not accurate or complete. And we use a certain set of tooling there. So the understanding part, which I talked about before, we reconcile information back to the administration. We do some review analytics, focus on trends. If we really see some remaining areas where we feel we need to do more, we can even do some very small sampling. And we'll also do some limited inclusion of sites. And as a result of sort of that package being limited opposed to the financial audit, you'll see that a lot of auditors and companies use a centered approach. So you go to the head office and maybe do 2-3 site visits, do some plans, and that's how you structure these type of limited assurance engagements. Now, if you go to the financial audit level, which is reasonable assurance, you're not saying with an absolute certainty that the numbers are correct, but it's a really high degree of certainty, and that requires testing of internal controls, and it will require testing IT systems. It will require more large sample sizes for each of the metrics that you have in place rather than maybe for a few. So it's really a lot more work, and that's where you will see that if we move from limited to reasonable assurance, also the way we construct these audits will be different, where you will see more component auditors in different countries because you have to go to way more sites and countries to really audit that information. So yeah, there's a big difference between those two. I think now we are ready to give limited assurance. I believe it's very complex to give reasonable assurance from two angles. One, the audit profession also needs to develop how do we look at certain types of information. So let's say forward-looking information that's included in the sustainability reporting, but also information from the value chain, how to assess reliability of statements that suppliers provide around the carbon emissions, or how do we need to audit life cycle analysis. I think there needs to be a lot more thinking through that before we want to say throughout the world, hey, we get to this level of reasonable assurance for all these companies. And I think the plans of the European Commission, I think they say like in 28, they want to come out with an audit standard and maybe move to reasonable assurance. Look at when that can happen. I think it's very ambitious, and I think we definitely need quite some years to get there.
Yeah. Wijnand, interesting. So, I mean, that is a discussion probably, because I know that most companies, are looking at, okay, well, when are we ready for reasonable assurance? And it takes actually quite a step up, I think, right, in what you have to do internally. So maybe a few words on your ambition, and then I go back to Jan because he may also have some questions. But first you on the...
Great, yeah. So briefly, so I think the word limited assurance, for me, not being educated as a financial auditor, is one of the words which is misinterpreted by many, because limited does require a lot of work already. I must say I see Marcus and his team almost more than my wife during that period of the year. So it is a lot of work there. Having said that, I think for us, yes, we are working on a road to reasonable assurance. We do that not only because there might be something like it's mandated at some point by the European Commission. For us, it's really about, like I mentioned before, we build our strategies, we build our approach to sustainability, but even our incentives for our senior executives, which is a larger group of the organization, are built on ESG data. We better make sure that we have the controls in place, we have the systems in place. And whenever that moment comes, well, we might decide to also get the reasonable assurance externally. But for me, it's not about having that different piece of paper in my annual report. It's about having the quality of the data, having all of that build up, having the systems in place. For me, is much more important than just that the statement of the auditor.
Yeah, that's important.
Maybe
Jan, for you, maybe. Sorry, Marcus, you want to come in on that?
Yeah. So where Wijnand started, like the misinterpretation of limited assurance, I think that's a very important point. Where I'm quite worried about as an auditor is the expectation gap between the stakeholders getting the information, seeing the stamp of the auditor on that, and thinking like, okay, this is like turned around 100 times to make sure that's absolutely correct, versus the actual work that you do. Although it's a lot, it's definitely not the extent to a reasonable assurance. So that how to manage that will be a challenge for us as auditors, I think.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of discussion also on how we're going to report, right? Also, the limited assurance reports under the CSRD. I think there's quite a bit of onus on us as a profession. I'm also from the profession, clearly, where we're discussing we need to communicate better to avoid new expectations gaps arising, right? And
exactly.
So we touched on a few of these things. Yes, we can testify that the ambition that the company has expressed is maybe realistic, or at least is consistent with other plans that they have, or what we know we can, but we don't have a view on the ambition itself, for example, right? Whether that's enough. I mean, that is something that is a discussion that the company needs to have with its stakeholders, whether it's investors or NGOs or employees or customers. So but I think there's quite a bit of potential still, but I think it is on us then, in our assurance opinion, already to to maybe be more expensive than just saying it's nothing has come to our attention. That's the discussion that we're still having. I'm a bit conscious of time, but Jan, I haven't asked you for a while, so any further questions that you want to raise from the two gentlemen?
Right, so thank you very much, and just it's a question on this integration of information. So to what extent is that integration actually an issue at the station? For instance, how and when a reduction in emission is going to convert in a financial number. First you have costs, of course, so negative, but later on you get profit. So to what extent is that actually part of the attestation? And there is where financial audit and environmental audit come together, I guess. So to what extent is that an issue that you look at, Marcus, and also Wijnand? Is that something that you take into consideration as well?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So obviously we're looking at the cost side, and it's more easy to comprehend. If you look at the opportunity side of things, or the risk side for that matter, it's mainly focused at this point in time on the valuations on the balance sheet. So if you have assets that are valued at a certain amount, we will assess whether there are risks in there coming from climate change, or whether there are effects there that come from ambition plans. So if you have a factory that operates purely on gas and it's very expensive to electrify such an asset, and your plans are to go to zero in 2030, and obviously your right of term should stop somewhere at 2030 and cannot go on to 2040. So with that lens, we're looking at valuations, because that's, I think, the most important part of the financial statements, where you actually do have some forward-looking information embedded in the balance sheet. So that's a bit how we assess that in our financial audits.
Thank you.
Wijnand?
Thank you.
Yeah, for us, but that's more of a strategic discussion. So yes, there are risks involved, and we report a lot on risk, but we should never ever forget about the opportunities which arise from sustainability. And we have solutions which reduce the energy bill of our customers quite significantly. Keep cool technology is reflecting the sunlight. So in a place like Shanghai or in Singapore, we reduce the energy consumption of a building by about 10 to 15%. That is a significant saving that we're able to create. It reduces the carbon emission very significantly. So we should always look at both sides. Then on the reporting side, that becomes really complicated because how much of that is being driven by sustainability, and we got into a lot of difficult conversations. But to kind of say, like I also started is saying, it is not only about reporting. It is about taking the real action in the real world and making the change. And this is making real changes. Then how are we going to report on that is round two, I would say, of the conversation, which we haven't solved yet.
Well, with that, Wijnand, I think
Thank you
it's a fantastic way to wrap up, because I was also going to make that actually the key point still, right? As we said, reporting is a means to an end, and clearly we're on a journey. It's not easy, but you've already said, also when you report, you have to be transparent on what your challenges are and where you are on that journey. Right, for auditors, it's a new game, and as Mark has explained, it's more than what we have to do now, right? It's the whole report. It's going to be more feeling like what we're doing for financial statement audits in terms of the work that we do. But in the end, it's about achieving results, right? And it's not about the reporting. It's about achieving results, and to have that right conversation with your stakeholders as a company, whether that's your investors or your NGOs or others. I thought it was a very insightful panel. I hope that the audience agrees. I'm going to thank you all for your insights that you provided today. And with that, I'm going to close. So thank you very much.